These two are bears. Those two up there are ravens. They have straight, narrow beaks. And also these two to my right are also ravens. Ravens will generally have a dark coloring, like a black coloring, and a long, skinny beak. So that's just the way they work. So those two, they all serve the same purpose, house or heraldic poles. Why it is important to have a house pole is if you invite another village over, another clan, to your clan house for a potlatch or a party, they want to know they're in the right place. Because every house will always be facing the ocean. All your totem poles facing the ocean so that when your guests arrive by canoe, they come up to the shore right up to your house. But if they show up at the wrong house, whoever lives in this house, if it's the wrong one, they look outside, they see 40 canoes pull up, filled with all sorts of people, especially with men with weapons. They think they're under attack. That would start a war. You don't want to start a war when you're trying to start a party. Just don't want to. That's why it's so important to have these house poles. That's their purpose, to tell you who lives there. Another pole I'll tell you about is mortuary or memorial poles. If you look on either side of the street behind you, there are two almost identical poles. There's an eagle at the top. You can tell it's an eagle by the curved yellow beak, the white head, and the open wings. And at the bottom there is a beaver. You can tell it's a beaver because he has the big buck teeth and the cross-hatched tail right between his legs. There is a third pole exactly like those, over to my right, eagle at the top, beaver at the bottom. Traditionally, well, these are mortuary poles, or memorial poles. They act as modern-day grave markers or tombstones. They will tell you where someone's buried, where they were laid to rest. But traditionally, they wouldn't be on the same island where they lived. They believe in reincarnation, that when you come back, you take on a new form, a new life. So they would bury you and mark your grave on a different island, probably Pennock Island. That way, when you come back, you can start your own new village. You don't have to go back to the old one. The only reason these three poles are here is because this tells the story of three brothers who were lost at sea in a fishing expedition. They went out fishing, a big storm kicked up, and they were lost. They never found their way home. Which is a really big deal because there's a lot of ritual that goes into laying the dead to rest. Instead of burying you, because we don't have very much topsoil here, it's very rocky, they would cremate you and put your ashes into a box. Put that box into a hollow space in the back of the totem poles. And that would be how they laid you to rest. But the fact that these three brothers never returned home, that their bodies were never recovered, was a very big deal. Which is why they made these three very big poles, and why the three eagles on top are looking three different directions. To show that they're still looking for those brothers to this day, trying to bring them safely home. So yes, those are mortuary poles, the three brothers.
Don't we have also family poles that tell the story generation to generation?
Yes, do they have family poles that tell generation to generation? That would be another type of house pole. Traditionally, those ones would be right in front of the clan house. They just don't happen to have one right here. It would tell you like what clans live there generation to generation. They just don't really have one on display. It's called a house pole. It's the same type of thing. So the next pole I'll tell you about is behind me to the right. That is a commemorative pole or an honor pole. There's an owl on the top. You can tell it's an owl because he has a short curved beak, slightly open wings, and at the very bottom is a weasel. What's one thing that sticks out about that weasel immediately, color-wise? He's white. In other words, he's held in very high esteem, very high honor. This is the shaman pole. Shamans being the medicine men of the people. The weasel was considered to be a very wise animal that would guide the shamans during their 15 years of traveling in the wilderness to become a shaman. So this pole exists, there's no real story behind it, it's just honoring all shamans that have come before, the ones that exist now, and the ones that are yet to come. So that's another type of pole they make. An honor or commemorative pole would be used to honor one specific group or to commemorate the end of a war, a treaty, something like that. But we'll run into those as we're going on. The next type of pole, not this one right behind me. If you look further back, there's a really colorful one with a wing on the top, one wing's missing. Right back there. So that one has a lot of images on it. Do any of you want to venture a guess as to what that pole is about? Children, could be. Previous wars, could be as well. I'm getting some good guesses. The rest of you, though, kind of giving me a blank look like you don't know. That's good, actually, because nobody knows the story of this pole. Come on, I'm not talking about this pole that's right next to me. I'm talking about the one further back. Nobody knows the story of that pole. It is our mystery pole. So the way these polls work, you have to understand, you don't read a poll like hieroglyphics. You can't walk up to a random poll and just know the story of it, top to bottom, and read it. It doesn't work that way. Traditionally, the Tlingit language was oral. All of their stories had to be passed on by word of mouth from generation to generation. The polls themselves acted as a point of reference, where it would remind you of key details, key characters, and key events in the story itself. But you won't actually know the full story unless somebody has told it to you. For that reason, all of the stories might sound different if you hear them from someone else. All the stories I may tell you, because this is the way I've heard them personally, the way they've been passed on to me. So that's a disclaimer. Go in and be like. And also you have to understand that when they first told most of these stories, they would tell them during a potlatch, and it would take 1 week to tell one story. And being as we don't have 21 days here to go through my legends, I have to cut them down a lot into like 2 or 3 minute stories, which I do for your benefit, of course, so you don't have to spend the next couple months here. But that's a disclaimer. But the mystery poll here, this is one that for one reason or another, the story was lost. Whether it was a private family story, whether it was only relevant to one time period, one clan, for one reason or another, it wasn't passed on, and without the carver here to tell us, we don't know what the story is. We can gather a few things from the details on it. Like if you look at the very top, there's a bird with a straight beak like a raven, but he has the coloring and the wings of an eagle. Underneath that, there's a man, and then a bear, then there's a bear at the very bottom eating another bear. I don't know who that could mean. In the very center, there's a face with 2 tones in it, half white and half black. The 2-tone face means that somebody died in this story, somebody of very high rank or importance. But without the carver here to tell us, we don't know for sure the story. We just know what we can. However, there is another story that I do know. The next 2 polls, if you look in front of the clan houses, there are those 2 ravens. Those ravens are house poles, like we mentioned before, but they serve a second purpose. They tell the legend of ravens stealing the sun, which is the most common, the most popular legend in all of Southeast Alaska. If you look underneath the left raven, he's carrying the moon. If you look underneath the right raven, he has the sun. So you'll kind of see this all throughout the city, a raven with the sun in his talons or in his beak or both. So right here, this story starts out many eons ago, before there was any light sources in the world. There was no sun, no moon, and no stars. The only way you could have light was to build a fire, which is a real problem for our main character Raven here, because he doesn't have fingers, he only has feathers. Real problem. So Raven, though, he heard of a chief in a nearby village who owned, in a sealed bentwood box, this mystical artifact known as the sun. The sun was said to be a mystical artifact, a great light source that could fill the entire world with light. Oh, hello. So naturally, Raven, being a very greedy bird and very mischievous, he wanted to steal the sun for himself. So he came up with a cunning plan to steal it. He transformed himself into a hemlock needle, the flat, tiny needle from a hemlock tree. He floated down the creek to where the chief's daughter was taking a drink, and she drank this needle by mistake, which, as the legend goes, made her pregnant. I guess that's how it works. I don't know. So 9 months later, the chief's daughter gave birth to a son who is now the Raven. Raven had effectively turned himself into the chief's grandson, which maybe some of you are vaguely aware of how grandparents treat their grandchildren, right? A little bit spoiled, let's say, at least. Is that like justifiable to say?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Grandchildren are spoiled. That's good. It makes sense. So naturally the chief said, "Okay, grandson, I will give you whatever you desire. What do you want?" And Raven, being cunning, goes, "I just want to play with your magic box, the one that has the sun in it." And the chief, of course, is like, "No, I don't think that's such a good idea." To kind of put that in modern day terms, that would be like handing the car keys to your 1967 cherry red Chevrolet Corvette to a 5-year-old. You would never ever do that, no matter how much you love the child. So actually the chief, this was his most prized possession, and he refused me. He said, "I'm sorry, grandson, I cannot give this to you. It's too important, too prized." But then Raven did what children and grandchildren have been doing for generations to get what they want. He threw a temper tantrum. He was crying, he was screaming, he was kicking the walls. He even held his breath till he was blue in the face. And finally, after 3 days of this, the chief had enough. He said, "Fine, you've pressed me too hard. I'm just going to let you play with the box as long as you swear me an oath that you will not open it." And Raven, of course, is like, Scout's honor, Grandpa.
Yeah.
Clever Raven. But then after Chief hands the box to Raven, he then leaves the clan house. We don't know why. He must have had a headache or needed a drink of water. One reason or another he left, leaving Raven unaccompanied with the box. And this is what Raven's been waiting for all along, so he opened it and released the sun into the room. It released the most glorious light anybody had ever seen. It was so bright, so powerful, it shone directly through the clan house walls. And those clan houses have thick walls. It shone directly through the walls, everybody could see it, and it was floating up and up and up towards the ceiling, and Raven's just watching it going, yes, this is it, it's mine. But as fate would have it, the sun was too big to fit out the smoke hole. It got stuck in the chimney. So Raven, thinking quickly, turned himself from a human back into the white raven he was before. And he flew up and he started shoving on the sun, trying to get it out the roof. He pushed so hard though, he broke it. A few fragments of it flew up into the sky and became the stars. With a big shove, a big chunk flew up and became the moon. With one final shove, all of his strength, he pushed, and he pushed. The sun ripped through the roof into the sky where we have it today. Today's weird because you can actually tell where it is. Normally it's cloudy, I'm just like, where it is today. But yes, keep in mind though, Raven was not trying to put the sun in the sky for us. He was trying to steal it for himself. But by mistake, he pushed it so hard that it flew so high in the sky, he could never get it back. It was well out of his reach. But at this point, the chief had returned to the clan house, and he was upset because he realized that his grandson had obviously opened the box because the world looked like this rather than darkness. So he went into the clan house ready to chastise his grandson, but instead of finding him, he only found this white raven flying around. And he realized this white raven had been impersonating his grandson all along. So he was angry with it. He grabbed him out of the air and threw him right into the fire pit. Didn't kill him though, didn't kill him. Just got soot and ash all over his feathers, then he flew up the chimney to safety. But you see, all of that soot and ash stained Raven's feathers black, which is why all ravens nowadays have that black coloring, because they all descend from this first raven. So this story does explain a lot of things, why we have the sun, the moon, and the stars where we have them today, and of course, why all ravens are black. That's a good story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, scientists have their reasonings for why the sun, the moon, and the stars exist. I like this story better. I feel like it rolls off the tongue better. It looks better in a book. But yes, that's Raven stealing the sun, probably the most popular legend. Another legend I have to tell you is right here to the left, behind me. You can see there's a loon on top, 3 bear cubs coming down, and a very large she-bear at the bottom holding on to a man named Kotz. Kotz being the main character of the story. However, this story is about the origin of rainfall. And being as whenever I tell this story outside, it starts raining, I'm going to wait till we're back in the trolley and tell you it on the way back to town, okay? Is that okay with all of you? Because I can even see the clouds like circling me as I think about telling it. I'm just like, uh-oh. So yes, for your own safety, I don't want to get wet. I don't have a jacket right now, you may have noticed. I'll tell you on the way back to town. Next story right here to the left. Do any of you want to gather, who is that man on top of that totem pole?
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln?
It is Abraham Lincoln. Well done.
Lovely.
What does Abraham Lincoln have to do with Ketchikan? Why is he on a pole? Any ideas?
He was the presidency when the Alaska became a state.
It is, well, not when it became a state.
I mean,
yes.
State was in 57.
President Lincoln sent his Secretary of State, William H. Seward, up here to buy Alaska from the Russians, which is true, and that's a very good reasoning why this pole would exist, but that's not the reason at all. Abraham Lincoln himself has nothing to do with this pole. Don't worry, I'll explain it to you. It'll make sense. So in the late 1800s, there were 2 clans here in Alaska that were at war with one another. They were fighting, they were killing each other, and one clan was almost completely wiped out by the stronger clan. So the weakened clan was fleeing out into the bay with their canoes, being chased by the stronger clan who was following them in their canoes. But it just so happened that a little bit further north of here, there was a U.S. Navy cutter ship in port, a big Navy vessel. So the weakened clan hid behind that ship. The stronger clan didn't want to attack it because that Navy ship had all of its big guns. It would have shredded those little canoes like nothing. So that ship was able to broker a peace treaty between these 2 clans. So that was a really big deal. They put up this pole in commemoration, in honor of the end of that war. However, they would have put the ship on top because the ship was the one who saved them. But it goes against all tradition to put an inanimate object on top of a totem pole. It has to be something living. a creature, a person, something like that. But it just so happens that the name of this cutter ship was the USS Abraham Lincoln. So, one of the crew members happened to have a photograph of President Lincoln, which they gave to the carver as a template. They carved it as best they could, but the photograph was cut off at the waist. And being as they didn't know how tall Abraham Lincoln was, they carved him as best they could, threw on those stubby legs, and now we have stubby Abraham Lincoln. Yes, that one at the end doesn't have a living figure on top. It used to have a kojic bird on it, but they're taking it away. Or they were restoring it. Kind of a fun story about a pole that's on a different part of this island. It's a Fogwoman pole. You'll kind of notice it as we're heading back to town. It's right next to Creek Street. There's a woman at the bottom holding onto 2 salmon, and she has there's a kojic bird on top of the pole. There's another one of those poles up north at Totem Bight, where the kojic bird had been taken off for restoration, and I didn't know that. So I walked up to the pole with my group and I was like, hey everybody, this is called the kojic bird pole because of the crap. There's just like an empty pole on top. But then I got this idea to start describing the kojic bird as if it was actually there. I was like, yeah, I really love the kojic bird. The coloring around it, you can tell it has the sharp beak, it was a predator, it dropped rocks on unwary people, mythological bird. I'm going on and on about it. And this lady raises her hand, she goes, what bird are you talking about? I was like, the kojic bird, the one on top. She goes, you mean the one on top of Fogwoman's head? I was like, no, that's a raven. I'm talking the one on the very top. She's like, how big is it? I was like, 4-foot wingspan, give or take. And they're like staring, I was like, oh, there's a legend behind the pole that you can only see the kojic bird if you're worthy to see it. They all laughed, they're like, ha 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 ha. But then there was a little 5-year-old kid standing there, and he's just staring up at the pole, and he just looks at me and he goes, I can see it. Everybody freaked. They're all like, and I just turned to the kid. I don't know how I kept a straight face, but I was like, there you go. Okay, let's head to the next pole. And I looked back and all 50 of them were taking pictures of the top of that empty pole. There's like, I feel really bad. They're like, oh my gosh, it does exist. They probably went on, it is real. No, all right.